Magnus Carlsen is obviously the best player in the world today, but how did he get started on his journey? This is a question I set out to answer and make a video about because I realized that was kind of a black hole on YouTube. When did Magnus Carlsen beat his first Grandmaster? The answer is in this video. Politiken Cup 2003. Magnus is 12 and a half years old, and he's playing a tournament in Denmark, which is now called the Extracon Open. It's round number 5, and Magnus's opponent is Christopher Ward, who is an English Grandmaster and an author. And it's actually funny, when I saw this, I was like, wait a minute, I think I have a Christopher Ward book on the Sicilian Dragon. And I did from, ancient times ago. So in this video, I'm going to show you this game from round 5, but I'm also going to show you a bonus game, which I haven't included in the title, I haven't included in the thumbnail, nowhere. So be happy you clicked on the video because you're going to have a bonus game here as well from the same tournament. Magnus begins with d4, and apparently he had prepared for this game by analyzing the Nimso-Indian book that his opponent had written. Now, in 2003, there were severe limitations compared to the year 2021 on the availability of chess material. Like, you had to be really good with your research. You really had to be in the ocean of chess kind of full time. So, Magnus plays knight to f3. Now, nowadays, when you play knight f3, knight c3, you're going to get d5. You're going to get a Queen's Gambit declined Rogozin defense, very popular. But back in the day, you would get b6, the point of which that, you want to play bishop b7 or sometimes the bishop to a6. Magnus plays bishop g5, pinning the knight. The bishop is promptly questioned at arrival, kind of like at the airport, bishop h4. And now black has the option to either just continue developing or play this aggressive move g5, which I can only imagine is what Christopher Ward recommended in his book. Bishop g3, knight e4. Now, this is also very common nowadays, especially in the Rogozin defense with bishop b4. You attack your opponent's bishop, you kick it out, and then you play knight e4 to target this knight on c3. Oftentimes, you will supplement that with f5. And yes, you have overextended the pawns near your king, but you've gained a lot of space, and it's very difficult for white to actually crack that structure. We have queen c2, bishop to b7, maintaining this tension here. This is very well protected. And e3. And white is about to play bishop d3 and kick the knight out for good, and the more pieces I can clear out of the center, the higher chance I have of attacking your king further on since you've overextended. So we have takes, and this move knight takes g3. Now, knight takes g3 optically looks really weird to me, I'm not gonna lie. It seems a lot more normal to play something like f5 and d6 and basically just clamp down on white's position. Like, why would you trade more pieces when you don't have the bishop pair and you have overextended pawns near your king? But knight takes g3 doesn't lose the game by any stretch of the imagination. And here, Magnus plays a really peculiar move, but definitely a move that he did not invent. When I ask you what is the more natural recapture, of course you will say the h-pawn. You open up your rook. You're not threatening to take with the rook hanging because the queen is protecting, but it's a much better looking move. But Magnus plays fg. Which is a super strange move. Clearly preparation, though, and a move that has been played before. And the point of this move is, like, if black continues with something like f5, for example, you actually can play g4. You can use that broken limb to smack your opponent in the face with it. And of course, if takes queen g6, and black just loses. Black is just completely lost because knight e5 is coming, and okay, you will not get mated now, but you will get mated sooner than later. g4. That's a little anthem there for my single people. Knight to h4, queen g5, and queen d2. Of course, we have to defend our weakness. And now Magnus will play bishop d3. He will play short castle. He will utilize the fact that this little wall of pawns is actually quite good at safeguarding his king. And the benefit of playing f takes g3 is when you castle, you will have the open file for the rook. This is all part of the preparation. Knight c6, bishop comes out to d3, very natural move. And here black has a couple of ways of playing, but he plays knight to e7. And that move fights for the complex over here to counteract that knight, also reactivates the bishop, also opens up whatever flexibility of pawns that you'd like to thrust into the center of the board, and furthermore, you can transfer the knight. Like, you're fighting for those squares, but you can also just move there and trade. So we have castles, and we have f5. He decides to counteract the open rook by making it impossible to really break into the structure. Also, Chris Ward gets connect 4, which is nice. But this position actually has still been reached. In this game, and also a game like 10, 15 years prior, And I believe that Grandmaster with the black pieces is Gula Sax, who is one of the, Gula doesn't suck at chess. The last name is Sax, S-A-X, which as an American should be said sax, like saxophone, but I'm pretty sure it's Sax. And I believe Gula Sax was Hungarian. I really hope I'm not messing that up. I probably should double check that on my second monitor, but I'm going to gamble. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. A4. Why A4? Well, you've kind of solved your problem of your king's positioning on the king side. You've castled. But you can't really do anything in the center. You're not equipped to attack in the center, so we play A4 to try to instigate with A5. Now, normally, you just play A5 here for black. I mean, you see your opponent wants to play A5, so you play A5 yourself. That's what I would play. The problem with that move is now you've destabilized this, and now I will play Rook B1, and I will try to play C5, because you've given me another target. Chris Ward obviously didn't like that, so he just played short castle. He was not afraid of A5, and Magnus said, all right, well, if you're going to let me play A5, I'm going to play A5. Let this be a little lesson for all of you in wing pawn, flank pawn, kind of side pawn infiltration. So useful. So useful. As you see, it's very difficult for your opponent to decide whether to actually stop you or not. And this can open up a new front of attack. Like now you just have a rook here, and your rook is pressuring this way and this way. And white is just much better with that very simple pawn exchange. It's already, like this position is zeros, and this position, oh, sorry, that's the move that actually happened in the game. But this position is like plus 1.5 for white. Because if you just completely seamlessly improved your position with no like cost. I mean, what cost? If a move like knight c6 comes, you can plant your rook here. And again, the more you make your opponent move and react to you, the better it is. Like, this whole little maneuver that you've just undergone here, you've weakened d6, you've split the pawns, you've weakened these pieces. Success. All by playing a4, a5. Now, Chris Ward plays d5. d5 optically is a mistake. You can tell it's not a great move. Why? If I ask you, why is d5 a mistake? You say, well, I actually don't know, because takes. I don't, right, but it has nothing to do with that. This pawn move, how does it affect the rest of the black pieces? Well, this bishop is now blocked, right? And if dc4 is coming, okay, fine, but that's a big decision. This pawn is now a backwards pawn, a pawn that cannot move forward. And if you were to ever play dc bishop c4, you've just kind of activated my bishop. So the best thing for him to do was kind of to sit back and do nothing. To play like rook e8, rook f7, very slowly try to improve his position. But it's very hard to do that. He decides to play d5. Now Magnus plays a very professional move. Maybe not the best move, but a very professional move. Queen to e2. I would love to sit here and pretend like I know the reason behind this move. Basically, what Magnus is doing is he's unpinning, number one, and he's ready to play e4 when the moment is right. And he's anticipating that dc4 will come, taking an eye off the center, and then he will be able to play e4 supported by this other rook. So it's a preparation kind of move. What I don't understand here is what if black just doesn't take this pawn ever? Like black just sits back and plays rook f1, rook f8 for the rest of the game. Clearly Magnus had something prepared there as well. Maybe he was going to take on d5 and then play e4. Maybe he was going to, I don't know. I didn't ask. But that's probably the idea. So king g7 is the move played, and now rook e1. And again, here Chris Ward does take, but I was like, what if he didn't? Like, what if he played like rook f7? And I think this is the idea. Here's why it's the idea, because if black just desperately tries to hang on to not allowing this move to be possible, I have a feeling Magnus would have just then played c4 and shredded open the position, utilizing his open f file. This is white's biggest asset, the open f file right now. dc4 does get played, takes, and we have this knight d5, and now we see all of this justification, e4. And you say, wait a minute, isn't this pawn hanging with an attack on the queen? Yeah, it is. But knights are kind of like mice, where you can lure them in and then trap them, and they went in, but they can't get back out. They can't get back out. If the knight were to take on e4, 2 pawns up for half a second, Magnus just goes here, and now he hits these pawns from behind, and you all know how good it is to hit it from behind. So we have c7, g7, b7, f5. I mean, this is the best, the best way to destroy a position is to infiltrate and then go back out, and this is just game over. So queen c2, bishop takes e4, queen takes c3, and Magnus Carlsen has emerged with an extra horse. Now, His extra horse is quite immobile. In fact, it hasn't moved for half the game. In fact, it has no moves. So how is Magnus actually going to utilize this advantage? Rook e8, first he's going to make this trade. Now he's going to play bishop b5. That move hits the rook and the pawn. Of course, Chris Ward does this. Now, when you are winning by material, you should simplify the positions. The easiest way to win. Bishop c6. Now the bishop has, by the way, hitting the bishop from behind again. Now the bishop's got nowhere to go. It has to trade. Rook f6. And this is where the empire crumbles. Queen comes back to c3, spying the king. King can't really move anywhere, and the idea is just to go d5. And once d5 happens, this pawn will be removed from the defense of this and this file, and it's all over. d5, queen f6. Now, he can take, but this is an even stronger move, because again, if pawn takes d5, which is what happens in the game, f5 is destabilized. Now we have a nice little knight takes f5, queen f5. Now, which one do you take? Do you take the queen and lose your queen, or do you take this first? A little calculation exercise. If this, then there's this, and you lose, because you have to take, and all of a sudden, you've emerged 2 pawns down in an endgame, and I have 3 connected pass pawns. Now we're in a Guess the Elo episode. No, this is no good. You have to go rook f5, they will take your queen, and now rather than taking this rook, you take that rook first with check, and this is where you emerge. Now, of course, black does have some pawns, and some precision is still required. For example, if you play rook d3 and just move your rook for the remainder of the game, there is a small chance that you blunder this. I mean, rook b3 is the best move, because you're going to win this pawn. But let's just say you play like rook a3. I don't know why you would play that move, but, you know, the more time you spend, like, yeah, but then rook a6, the more time you spend doing nothing, you give black enough rook moves to do nothing. Like, black is going to get the king with the pawns, and this is now going to be a headache. So what you have to do is what Magnus does in this game. You have to win a pawn and bring the king at the same time. You basically need to not make sure that these pawns can't move forward. This king is completely cut off on the e-file, and that's exactly what ends up happening. The pawns have no forward mobility anymore, and now they will be won. And it was in this position on move 39 that Christopher Ward resigned. Magnus Carlsen got his first GM scalp. Defeated the first ever Grandmaster of his life. But I told you that if you stuck around, I would give you some bonus content. In the last game of this event, which was an 11-round tournament, Magnus Carlsen played Humpy Koneru Humpy. She was the youngest Grandmaster, the youngest woman to achieve the Grandmaster title at the time, surpassing the record of Judith Polgar. I believe at the time of this game, she's 15 years old. 15 or 16 years old. And Magnus Carlsen plays her in the final round. And I have to show this game because why not, right? So Magnus is white again. He plays d4. And this time Magnus invites once again this kind of d4, c4, knight f3. We have b6. So this is the Queen's Indian defense. I know, you've probably heard King's Indian. Some of the beginners don't even know that the Queen's Indian exists. It's kind of the same concept, but on the other side of the board. G3 to try to play bishop to G2. Notice that no knight has been committed, and if Magnus Carlsen wanted a transposition, he would have tried to go for this, but now black is not obliged to play bishop b4. So we have G3, bishop a6. That's another one of the ideas of the Queen's Indian. B3, bishop d5, which attacks, and now bishop G2. And in many of these positions, this bishop is kind of the MVP. So for example, if the move d takes c4 is played in this position, you will go here, attack the rook, win back your pawn, and have no problems. So we have bishop g2, and already as early as move 9, we have a position that's been reached twice. And as early as move 10, we have a position that's never been reached, ever. So, interesting position kind of right off the bat. Nothing has been traded in 10 moves, no pawns. That changes in a couple of moves. White has a bit of a space advantage. Black plays knight a6 to play knight b4, and if you play something like a3, a slow move to try to prevent knight b4, black is going to play c5. So supplementing the idea of the knight on a6, not just to play knight b4, but to go here, bring the rooks to the center, and black has kind of equalized in terms of central space. Of course, this knight is a little bit offside, and white still remains a little bit better, but there is one maneuver in these positions that is well known to give white some pressure on black's position. Now, if you don't know this position, you will not know this idea. It's a very weird idea to just come up with. But Magnus Carlsen is a genius, even at the age of 12, and he knows it, and the idea is knight to h4. This move kind of the whole desire here is to emphasize how much worse white's light-squared bishop is compared to, black's light-squared bishop compared to white's light-squared bishop. White's light-squared bishop is very nice, stable, but this bishop has no guard. And the pressure on the center is very important. And there's a secret idea that if you ever want to play cd5 and black takes with the pawn, this knight will now land on f5. That's the other idea. And there's a third idea, to add the bishop to e4 so you can play pawn to e4. So, completely on their own now, black plays bishop a3. The whole point of this move is to trade one of white's kind of lurking bishops, regain control of b4, and fight like this. Maybe c5 as well, with the queen pressuring everybody over here. You hear the banging outside. There's a ladder being pressed against my wall. Not by an intruder, but by some construction workers. Takes. Magnus took on d5. We have takes, takes, and takes. Why would you invite knight to f5? Well, you really want to prevent e4. You know, for example, if black plays bishop takes d5 inviting a trade, I just go here. Now, you might argue that these pawns don't really leave an impression on anybody. I still play rook d8 and I just attack them. And you're not completely wrong, but e takes d5 is played, e3, and now knight to e4, defended by the pawn, the bishop, and the queen. Kind of a nice position. Magnus now brings back the knight. Sometimes in chess, you have to admit, okay, my maneuver was not that great, so we gotta move on. c5. Now the knight goes back, goes into e5. It wasn't great over here, it goes in here, cuts off the circulation from the queen. f6 here is actually kind of a very natural question to ask, and at that point I imagine Magnus just would have gone here. This knight is really just going on a journey around the board, to maybe go to f4 to pressure the center like this, but black played rook c8 in the game, rook c1, rook e8, now Magnus just voluntarily backs up. And there's a really big question that's about to be answered of what's going to happen with the central pawns. Right? If you take, what will Magnus take with? Well, he would love to take with the queen, but he can't because of this. So, would he play this? I don't know. Rook e1 to pin? I don't know. Knight c7 though. Defending the center, but disconnecting the rook from the defense. Magnus plays knight f4, all part of the plan. I did just say that that's what he was going to do. Queen here, knight here. Why knight here? Well, I think it's actually the offering of a repetition of moves. I think. Maybe Magnus would have declined it, but I think if Magnus could have had it his way, he would happily draw the final round of Politiken Cup. But Connor, who plays g5, she's playing for a win. She's playing for a win. She's playing a, young whippersnapper, Magnus Carlsen. She's not much older than him at this point. Knight e2, knight e6. And black is getting what you normally like to get in Queen's Indian positions, which is some sort of attack on the king. If white takes too much time in Queen's Indian positions, black can oftentimes get some sort of attack with f5, f4, g4, knight g5, knight to f3. It's a nice looking position. It's still quite balanced, very complex. Queen f6 repins the pawn and doesn't let Magnus do anything in the center. So Magnus blocks the pin, attacks the center, threatens knight b5, knight d6, knight a7. And here, knight f8 solves some of these problems, like e4 not having a guard, but drastically makes a mistake of another. Knight to f8 enables Magnus to play d5. Now the bishop has been disconnected from the defense of e4 forever. Magnus Carlsen has a passed pawn which made it through the gates. It will be defended, e4 will be won, and Magnus has a big advantage. So what was the best move then, if it wasn't knight f8? Well, you can consider taking on d4. And then if, for example, knight e4, bishop e4, and we have a big trade. We have this, something like king g7 to make sure the queen is protected. The center will explode. You can take for a moment, but I will go here and win this back. Now, maybe black saw this. Maybe black saw this, but was like, I don't want to draw. In fact, this position could very well just end up being a complete draw. This is a draw. This is just complete. Maybe black saw this and was like, I'm going to keep the tension. Maybe black had to win to get a GM norm or something. I don't know. And played knight f8. But after d5, bishop a6, and just very simply unpinning, no one's going to be able to guard this pawn in time. Now, black tries, I guess, to play bishop d3. This was the idea of putting the bishop here. But here there's a nice danger level concept. At this point, Magnus Carlsen, obviously familiar with the danger level video that launched 18 years later on YouTube. Knight e4, a queen is worth as much as a queen. Take, this comes with check, by the way, so that's even worse. and you're just completely winning. So Magnus obviously sees this, and bishop d3 is impossible, and he's picking up the pawn, and now plays this very nice move. He wins the pawn in the center. It's a very nice move here. It's a really nice move here by Magnus. This is the best move according to the computer. b4. And this is a pawn attack, because if you take, then I will go here, and your entire queen side just collapses. So I open the door for my queen, but with that pawn move, can't guard anything. So instead of that, we had f5, trying to create some sort of confusion. Magnus comes back with the knight, knight d7, and still plays queen a4. Now, black is just in time with the defense of the bishop, but black is not just in time with the defense of the entire queen side. Now that pawn triumphantly marches through, it still cannot be taken because it would be lined up in an attack like this. So knight b8, and the final cookie crumbles with the most Magnesian of moves possible. It has nothing to do with the pawn, it has nothing to do with the pieces or the bishop. It has to do with the collapse of the queen side. a4. It's almost like the Lion King, where, you know, Scar stabs the nails before the fall. I don't want to spoil too much, although I kind of just spoiled everything. a4. That's it. Now queen d6, a b5. The bishop is under attack. Rook e5 is a nice move. Of course, if Magnus takes the bishop, he loses his queen. But he has this very aesthetic move, queen a1. If you take with the bishop, I can take on c4. Also, the rook is now protected from any pins. And rook b5, knight does not even take on c4. He goes knight e4, hitting this way. Knight f6 is coming. And it shows you how overextended black's position is. Kind of similar to the Chris Ward game, where black overextended a lot with the pawns. And if you notice, Magnus didn't have any pawn cross the middle line except the d pawn. Right? Didn't have any. Okay, I mean, a takes b5. But this is kind of two games that show how his opponents, and now just the knight comes back to d5 and black resigns. Black resigns because you cannot deal with everything. You could not deal with knight coming into c7, hitting the queen, queen coming into f6. For example, the move queen e6 just loses to this. And if you play like queen, I don't even know, d6, guarding both, then I come back like this, and you're going to lose material. And if you go, I don't know, to like b7, there's this move. And, you know, it's two games that were solved by Magnus against very, very strong players by virtue of overextension. Like Magnus played a very solid maneuvering game, being very patient at the age of just 12 years old, finding the optimal squares for his pieces, and using the higher rated player kind of against themselves. You know, in this case, like black could have gone here and the game could have ended by repetition, but black instigated with Magnus and ultimately found themselves in a spot where potentially the best course of action would have led to a draw. Sometimes tournament situation doesn't permit you to make a draw. Maybe you need to play for a win, or you just play for a win because who's this young 12-year-old trying to draw me? I'm going to beat this guy. Nope, d5. And this is the only pawn that crossed into, you know, the whole territory. So all his other pawns hung back, and it kind of goes to show you that even to this day, Magnus Carlsen does not overextend very much with his pawns. So that, folks, was the way Magnus Carlsen defeated not just his first Grandmaster, but credit to those of you that stuck around for the bonus game, his second Grandmaster, all in the same tournament. Same thing actually with me. I beat my first Grandmaster in Classical Time Control in World Open, Philadelphia. I beat my first GM in round 4, and I beat my second GM ever, or round 5. 5-8. 5-8. Not 5-11, but 5-8. I beat my first two Grandmasters. And so I'm basically like Magnus Carlsen. You watched 24 minutes of this video. My chess career blooming not at 12, but at 21 or whenever that tournament happened. But it's always a great feeling. That first GM win gives you all the confidence in the world that you have the capabilities. And, well, Magnus, I mean, the rest is history. He's been beating Grandmasters for the next 18 years of his chess career. And Magnus Carlsen achieved his final IM norm at the Politiken Cup, becoming an international master in 2003 in July. And 2004 was, hey, that was the year of Magnus, baby. That was, man, he really popped off that year. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, folks. And if there's any other content you want me to cover when it comes to Magnus or any of these like top super GMs and their journeys and careers, do let me know in the comments below. Peace out. I will see you in the next video. Get out of here.